Dear audience, welcome to the show POWERchat, Nepal's only TV talk show in English discussing development since 2016. Through this special episode tonight, we are discussing EU-Nepal development cooperation, focusing on post-pandemic development priorities and the EU-Nepal Joint Commission meeting. We will also be focusing on the ways ending gender-based violence in Nepal. And I am joined tonight by Her Excellency Ms. Nona Deprez, Ambassador and Head of Delegation of the European Union to Nepal. Let's talk. Welcome to this show, Your Excellency.
Thank you very much, and good evening to all. And thank you very much, Mr. Laxman, and to Yoho TV for having invited me tonight.
It has been only a few weeks, 1.5 months, that you joined Nepal as the Ambassador of European Union and the head of EU delegation here in Nepal. How do you analyze Nepal's development process as such?
Well, yes, as you've said, I've only arrived in Nepal 6 weeks ago. I'm very honored to be the EU ambassador to Nepal. I think Nepal has made tremendous progress in its development in the last years. And this is really thanks to of course, the political stability that the adoption of such a modern and progressive constitution has brought. And also to good governance, and what is very important also is sound implementation of this constitution with this federalization process that is very important to bring service delivery close to the citizens.
Well, that's really interesting. It's only been 1.5 months. You are here. You would not be able to analyze the impact of your assistance here in Nepal as such. But the world is facing with the global pandemic, COVID-19. And is there any shift the way European Union has been supporting Nepal's development process?
Well, I mean, COVID-19 is really a worldwide fight. We're in this together, and we will only beat it if we're together and if we fight this together. Yeah, so Europe has also very much been touched by this pandemic. We have lost a lot of human lives, and of course, and our economies have been very, very badly hit. But what is very important to know is that the European Union has led the global efforts to find common treatments, to find common vaccines, and also to make sure that these vaccines are available to everyone in the world. And that's very important. And I think this is also where we and Nepal, we share the same value of supporting effective multilateralism, because we know that we will not be able to fight this pandemic on our own. So this is where it's very important that we work together. That's one side where EU has worked with Nepal. Then very specifically to Nepal, we have reoriented the ongoing projects, and we have adopted a specific package of 10 billion rupias that goes to Nepal's treasury to provide some fiscal space for Nepal to be able to respond to immediate needs by its citizens. So this is also one other way where we're working together.
You recently held a joint meeting with the government of Nepal, EU-Nepal Joint Commission meeting. What are the key areas that you focused, and do you have any priority shift amid COVID-19?
Well, we did focus, of course, on the effect of COVID-19 on our economies, on our societies, and on development cooperation. But EU-Nepal relationship is so much broader than only development cooperation, because we share so many universal values. We want to work together on governance, on human rights, on gender rights, on development, of course, on economic and trade, on investment. So we touched upon all of those areas. It was very important to exchange views on how our economies and our societies are touched by COVID. Obviously, COVID also exacerbates inequalities all over the world. And you mentioned gender-based rights at the beginning of this interview. The most vulnerable groups, including women and children, are even more touched in this pandemic. So it's very important to take that into account and to make sure that we take this into account into our development cooperation. As such, now the European Union has come to a very important part of its development cooperation, we are hopefully about to adopt a new financial instrument, which is called the Neighborhood Development and International Cooperation Instrument. This instrument will be a global instrument, and it will mix grants and loans and investments, and it will be very important to further EU and mutual interests and values abroad. So one very important thing for Nepal to know is that when Nepal will graduate from least developed country status, it will still be able to benefit from this instrument. So I think that's very important and potentially very powerful for EU-Nepal relationships.
Well, you touched upon so many interesting issues, from human rights, gender rights to good governance. There is often criticism that the resources coming from the development partners is not properly utilized. What do you have to say about the crisis of good governance here in Nepal?
Well, I don't know whether you know, but the European Union channels most of its development cooperation to Nepal through something we call budget support. This is one of our preferred modalities. This is channeling through the Nepal's treasury. This is very important to us, and it's fundamental because this allows us to align to Nepal's priorities, because the development process can only work and can only be sustainable if it's owned by its own institutions and by its own people. Of course, this is not a blank check. We are accountable to EU citizens, and we take this very seriously. And I also take it very seriously personally. I am also responsible for this. So some basic conditions have to be met before we decide to use this modality. This is looking at progress in fundamental rights, human rights, good governance. It's looking at macroeconomic stability. It's looking at progress in the sector reforms. And of course, it's looking at progress in public finance management, in transparency, and in accountability. So this is where a very strong and deep dialogue between the EU and the Nepalese authorities is very important. And this is also very important, that the constitution is properly implemented, and that the 3 tiers of government of Nepal are properly capacitated and enabled to play their role.
What are the major gaps in your analysis in relation to the delivery of good governance from the federal to local level governments?
Well, I mean, a federalization process is a very long process. So I'm really encouraged by the progress that has been made, and also by just seeing the local governments playing their political role. So that's very important. Obviously, there is always a traditional human, I think, tendency to stick to the old things and to stick to the traditional. But a lot of progress has been made on the way to federalization. And I think that's very important, because service delivery to citizens, close to the citizens, I think is one of the best ways to ensure Nepal's development, and also to ensure accountability, because those citizens are very close to the governments.
Well, would you like to comment upon Nepal's delayed transitional justice process?
Well, obviously, I think the last year there has been some delay in the implementation, in the finalization of the transitional justice process. We are very encouraged to see, of course, we've listened very carefully to the speech made by Prime Minister KP Oli at the recent UN General Assembly, affirming Nepal's strong commitment to transitional justice. So I think this can only work, of course, if it's an inclusive process, if it's Nepali owned, and if it advances, and if there is steady progress and long-lasting progress. Because long-lasting peace and sustainable peace and political stability are essential criteria to get to economic development and socio-economic development. Yeah.
Do you think that the ways Nepali authorities have been implementing their commitments on the human rights are in line with their commitments, Nepal's commitments to international community, especially that of the UN human rights treaties?
Mm-hmm. Well, I want to congratulate Nepal, of course, upon its re-election to the United Nations Human Rights Council. I think that's very important. I've read very carefully the brochure that Nepal has published with the commitments that it takes. This was in the campaign to be re-elected. So I think the EU is really ready to support Nepal if needed, if requested, in this path. It has to be Nepali owned and it has to be a Nepal process. Yeah.
Well, Your Excellency, despite legal efforts to end gender-based violence here in Nepal, girls and women across Nepal and mostly in the provinces of Tu and Karnali province, they face various gender-based violence. And you, along with the UNFPA and the government of Nepal, recently launched a project. What are your suggestions to the authorities of Nepal implementing the laws for combating gender-based violence or any forms of violence taking place against girls and women?
Yeah. Well, the European Union is really a global champion in the fight for gender equality and women empowerment. But I think if you see along across the world, we are not yet there. And this is not only about women's rights. This is really for the betterment of the entire society, because this is good for the economy. Each country has to use its entire talents pool in order to get to economic recovery, especially after this pandemic. But we've also seen all over the world that this pandemic has caused inequalities to even rise. And there women are more vulnerable because they are more in informal work, they spend more time with the perpetrators of violence, there is more economic stress, and also they have less access to legal support, to medical support, to psychosocial counseling. And we see this all over the world. So this is why the European Union, we have two ways of working on this. We mainstream gender equality into all of our programs. So if you look at what we do in education or nutrition, we have a special focus on recruiting female teachers, for example, or on focusing on maternal health, because that will also have an effect on the children's health. And then we have specific projects working really on gender-based violence. This specific project, which I was very proud to launch the other day, has two components. One component is to make sure that the victims have access to support via this one-stop center, which is based on a structure which is supported by the Nepali authorities. And the other part is to raise awareness in the communities about gender-based violence. Yes. I think this is unfortunately, there are now tensions all over the world going in the wrong direction against gender equality. And I think we just have to be very careful and attentive on this in everything we do, in everything we do in our daily lives. It's a long process and it requires a shift in mentality from men and women alike. And I think what is very important to know there is that women are needed for economic recovery.
Well, are you happy with the way development assistance has been utilized here in Nepal? What are the areas that need to be improved in relations to development delivery?
Well, yes, I mean, if you look at the fact that Nepal is still on a path to graduate from least developed country, this is evidence that Nepal is really on the right way to development. I think something which is very, very close to my heart and which is linked now to economic recovery post-COVID is resilient recovery. I feel very, very strongly about our own European Union's growth strategy, a modern growth strategy, which is the Green Deal. I think we really have to use this opportunity to build back better and to build back greener. And there is no trade-off, between economic growth and greenhouse gas emissions, because greenhouse gas emissions have decreased in the European Union while our GDP has grown. And this is also where I think we, as the European Union, we want to work with many countries in the world to build back greener, because on our own, we're also not going to make it. And we only have one planet. So this is really so important for the future of our children, of our planet, and of our economy, that we use this opportunity now.
Well, Your Excellency, you briefly touched upon the way Nepal's transitional justice process is, going ahead. What immediate actions are needed to ensure that, justice is provided to the victims and perpetrators are punished, that of the conflict?
I think what is really needed is, of course, a victim-centered process, and a process which is in line with international practices. I understand that a draft amendment law has been tabled in front of the legislative authorities. I think that's very important, that it's an inclusive process, and also that there is the proper oversight mechanisms, that all of the parts of society provide oversight and work together and have trust and confidence in the process that is developing.
Could you also elaborate some specific points that you discussed during last EU and Nepal joint commission meeting? Any specific recommendations on that meeting?
Well, the meeting, I think, really highlighted again that EU and Nepal are very like-minded in our support and our work towards effective multilateralism. And this is very important on trade, so working on rules-based open trade. This is very important in the fight against climate change. This is very important in support to peace, in working on human rights. So it's very important in many, many different ways. There, I think Nepal really has a unique role to play. I mean, being the guardian of the Himalaya, which is, as your Prime Minister said, is global good for humanity. So those were aspects that we worked on together, that we discussed together. Then we discussed, obviously, development cooperation. We also discussed trade and investment. It's very important that Nepal ensures a stable investment environment and a regulatory environment that will attract foreign direct investment. This is very important to promote your own value chain and to make sure that that Nepal reaches a bigger part of world trade.
Recently, the government of Nepal, the Home Minister was requesting you to lift the ban of the flights to European countries. Any discussion on that meeting?
Yes, of course. Obviously, civil aviation was discussed too. I think air safety is just something which is very important for all of us, and this is really touching upon life and death. So passenger safety is very important. I think there has been some delays because of COVID lately, so we look forward to the adoption of the law which will separate the civil aviation authorities into an oversight authority and a service handler, and then we look forward to the implementation of that law. And then it will be time to take stock of the progress made by Nepal. And the EU has provided a lot, will still provide a lot of support to Nepal, and is ready to provide support to Nepal on this path to lifting the ban, yes.
Well, Your Excellency, there are many interesting issues, but we are coming to the end of the show. Before we wrap up this show, I would like to ask you a question on your suggestions or recommendations to the government of Nepal, both engaging Nepal in the development process, and also that of, as you were referring, that you and Nepal are like-minded partners in many ways. What are your key recommendations to the effective implementation of federalism, plus addressing the conflict time cases and providing support or providing justice to the victims very quickly?
I think my main recommendation would be that it's very important to have an inclusive process, to have sufficient space for civil society, for press, for media, for oversight, for parliament, for ombudsman, for the auditors general, and to have, of course, a sound implementation of your very modern and progressive constitution, enabling all tiers of government to play their role. And then maybe, well, I will repeat myself because I feel very, very strongly about this modern growth strategy, which is to build back better and greener. And I really think that this is one area where we can work together on making sure that we use more circular economy, that we promote biodiversity. I think we have to learn that this pandemic has shown that there is a link between the environment and human health. And I think it's very important and it's urgent that we work on this together.
Any shift in your priority here in Nepal due to the pandemic?
Well, we are starting now the discussions with the Nepali authorities to discuss, to set the priorities for the next development programming. So obviously, I think we will work together on resilient recovery, and we will probably also keep on working on human capital development. These are things that we are currently discussing with the Nepali counterparts.
Well, Your Excellency, there were many interesting issues that you have shared with us. I would like to thank you for joining us. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Laxman, and thank you very much again to Yoho TV for having invited me. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Dear viewers, time now to wrap up the show. Keep watching us. See you next week. Namaste.